Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Kinky Politics. We have Chris and Kai coming at you again today.
Woohoo!
Today, we're going to talk about kind of a deep topic. In America right now, we have the coronavirus bill that's being kind of finalized, and one of the key components of that is whether or not they're going to include this $15 national minimum wage by 2025, I believe it is. We're going to kind of talk about if we think a $15 minimum wage or just minimum wage in general is the right way to go about, trying to address inequality and make America more affordable for the vast majority of working class people in this country. Because I live in the Denver area. The average one bedroom around here is about $1,200. It's pretty much impossible to find one below $1,000, and the minimum wage here is $14.77. So a $15 minimum wage isn't really going to really impact Denver. But in Seattle already has a $15 minimum wage. I don't know what it is in other big cities. I know it's at least 10 or more in like Los Angeles, New York, and all these other places. So I don't know, Kai, do you want to start? What are your thoughts on the minimum wage, or because you live in Australia, where I think the minimum wage is significantly higher than America. I don't know what housing costs are in Australia, but maybe give your perspective.
Yeah, I have been living in Australia for quite some time, but I wouldn't call it my home now. I've been staying here now in Boston. It'll be going on at least for, the end of 2020 until now. So almost, I don't know, it'll be about 6 months very soon. So, yeah. So anyway, so minimum wage.
Sorry,
I think, yeah.
So Boston, from what I understand, is either the most expensive or the second most expensive city in the country. Behind, I know it's either Boston or San Francisco are like 1 and 2.
Yeah.
You've been staying in Boston with your brother for about 6 months now. How many bedrooms is his apartment?
His apartment is 3 bedrooms.
Okay. Do you have any idea what the rent is for the 3 bedrooms?
Yes.
Can you share that information, or is that
yes. It's $2,000.
That's it?
On the low end.
How is that possible? Wow. Okay. Wow.
Out.
You can't even get a 3-bedroom apartment in Denver for $2,000.
The area he lives in is very working class, and it's outside of Boston.
Oh, okay.
Right. So it's not in Boston. It's in a remote area close to New Hampshire.
Okay.
Massachusetts has money.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Massachusetts has lots of money. I don't know what that statistic is, so I wouldn't be able to confirm or, deny whether or not San Francisco and Boston are the same, or which one's more expensive. But Boston is very, very expensive. Massachusetts alone is very, very expensive. He was able to luck out on a $2,000 apartment, I think because his landlords, it's a private situation.
Okay.
Landlords are very old. They have old money.
Yeah.
They're not really concerned, with selling their apartment. They enjoy the income, but my brother's been here for a long time now.
Okay.
And has had a relationship with them prior.
Okay.
It's something that they negotiated. If it were anywhere else, it would be upwards of,
Because I heard like parking spots in Boston cost like $1,500 a month.
Yeah, correct. It is very expensive to live in Boston. And it's very expensive to live in Massachusetts. Many people who travel to work in Massachusetts, I just said exactly what I was trying to say. I'm thinking faster than my mouth can speak. Many people travel to Massachusetts to work, but don't actually live here. When you live here, a lot of the people who work here say like, oh, you have that Massachusetts money. It's a running gag, because Massachusetts is just so expensive. But the greatest thing I think about this state, which I think a lot of people, including myself, take for granted, is the social welfare programs are out of this world.
Okay.
Obamacare is here, and it is here to stay as long as Biden doesn't mess with it or anybody messes with it. It's very, very good. Our minimum wage is on the higher end. I believe it is 15, but the standard of living is so high here. My brother happened to just luck out. You know what I'm saying? But the other thing is too, which I've realized, is very rarely you see homeless people. If you see homeless people here in Massachusetts, it's because they're actually not well. Because there's so many social welfare programs. There's so many like housing development lists that you can get on, or housing, what do you call it? Subsidized housing, or government housing that is actually decent. It's not like in the ghetto or anything like crazy like that. It's actually like in the center of the city or just outside of the cities, major cities like Worcester, for example, or in Boston. And they're livable. They're not like complete trash. You know what I mean? Like, as we know government housing to be, and lots of the social welfare programs seem to be lacking state to state. But I think the most promising thing that I have seen is the way Massachusetts seems to take care of their residents. They take care of them similarly to what Australia does for their people.
Okay.
And now the standard of living in Australia is fucking high as hell, excuse me, as well. I think it's comparable to Massachusetts or even Los Angeles, or even Sacramento. It's high, and the minimum wage there is pretty much the same as
Okay.
here. So minimum wage, if you're like a waiter or a waitress with no experience, you'll start at 17 an hour.
Plus tips? Or they don't do tips, right?
They don't do tips. 17 an hour, right? But now I think since I've been there, I think it's grown to like $21.50 an hour if you're a waitress or a waiter. But you will always get hours, and there are always jobs. If you do like an office job in your entry level, something like that, it's like 25 an hour. So again, it's pretty comparable to $15 an hour.
Okay.
But the thing with Australia, which I think is obviously better than Massachusetts, is that I think the social welfare programs that they have are heavily funded. So even though rich people don't like to fund into them, they still will. And they'll gripe about it and bitch about it, but they will give, you know what I mean? They'll be like, well, shit, those are my taxes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And we have something called in Australia called superannuation, which is where you have to sign up with an insurance company if you work for a company. And this separate insurance company then has this separate account for you in case you die or in case you get sick, or when you retired, you can take this money that they have saved for you. And it's a buildup of obviously you having worked for so long, but they extract a certain amount based on your wages, how old you are, a very little amount. And they also put in a bit of money for you as well. So there's interest in there for you. And it's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. So we've got, so I guess what I'm saying is, despite being a very young country, and I don't want to make this about Australia, but despite being a young country, like a young developed country, their programs, their social welfare programs for their people are very developed and very high functioning and very like they work, as we've seen like with COVID, the response to COVID, like it's working. Um, but yeah, I mean, I have to agree. I don't know if you even agree. I do think that raising the minimum wage to $15 is a good thing.
Yeah.
Yes, obviously, more money is better. But people are still having to work two, three jobs just to make rent, just to live, just to survive. Like, I have read so many stories of people who, you know, it's like, I don't know if you heard the story about this woman who um, was sent to jail because CPS was called on her because her children were left at home.
Yeah.
And
In a hotel, right?
yeah, at a hotel, exactly, because she had to go and work. And normally there's someone there, but in this instance, she wasn't able to get someone or something happened like that. Anyway, um, they they sent her to jail. And it's like she's just trying to provide for her family, you know? And then to add to that, you know, that her story has become viral, but then there was a GoFundMe set up for her because people were like, wow, we relate to this story and this is so tragic. And what's crazy is the power, well, one, the power of social media, but also America, Americans are very special because when we see someone's genuineness and we see someone actually trying, it's like as a people, as a culture, we band together. So despite our government officials fucking us up day in and day out, I just feel like they're raping us
Yeah.
um and killing us.
Hmm.
Still, we're like, let's get together. The spirit of America is crazy strong and it's crazy and it makes me feel very proud in a lot of respects. But on the flip side of that, it's so sad. It's like, so you mean all these people decided to donate to this woman so that she could get out of jail, be bailed out of jail to take care of her kids,
Hmm.
and also, you know, afford to just have some time to get on her feet a little bit. You know, it's like, where's the generosity of our government? When does the government step in to say, oh, yes, this is a problem. There are too many stories like this. You know, people shouldn't have to save other people. Like that's what to me, it's like that's what the government's for
Yeah.
for these types of scenarios. You know, because at the moment we're not. You know, there isn't war.
Hmm.
You know, there. You know, there's. It's like what else? What are they doing?
Well, we spend almost $1 trillion a year on our military, for one. But yeah, I completely agree with that. Because the main reason I want to talk about this today, as I told you earlier, was um, earlier this morning when I woke up, I found out somebody I used to work with. Um, I don't want to say it's a friend of mine because we weren't friends, but it was a former coworker of mine who had two kids and had kind of been battling like depression and just feeling hopeless about being able to ever kind of improve her situation because she's working wherever she was working. She was working full time, but couldn't make enough money to support herself, let alone her two kids as well. And just didn't quite have, I guess, the support system here. There's really no affordable housing or government subsidized housing. I mean, there is, but you're on a wait list for like 2 or 3 years to get into it. And when you need affordable housing now, you can't really wait 3 years to get into it. And my friend, she'd gotten in a car wreck, I don't know, sometime in the past, and the doctors gave her opioids for pain. So she kind of got hooked on that, and she'd kind of been battling that. Last I talked to her was a couple of weeks ago, and she was in a some kind of facility. I don't know if it was like a rehab facility or like a homeless shelter or something, but she was in some kind of facility where they were supposed to be giving her services and kind of helping her get back on her feet. And I guess, you know, she lost that battle, and it seems like she either died of a drug overdose or suicide. I'm not really sure which. I just know she's passed away and she's no longer here. And now, there's two young boys who are going to be growing up without a mother and with absentee fathers, and probably end up in the system and all that. And you know, I if you grow up in working class environments, like this is just a common thing everywhere in this country that you're hearing. If you work around poor people, like this is a common story you hear over and over again, is people just, because of how expensive housing is, and then insurance on top of that, because you kind of need insurance. So just housing and insurance alone, that eats up, at my job, for example, if I was to try and support myself just as an individual, like the cheapest studio apartment I could find, um, just housing would cost probably 65-70% of my income.
Hmm.
And that's just, like, to me, the fact that that is the way it is in America is just, I don't know.
It's
No,
unacceptable.
yeah, unacceptable. I don't know. I feel like saying criminal is just not strong enough. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. It just makes you just look at wealthy people just like
With
with
disdain.
disgust. Yeah, disdain. And like, how can you, like somebody like Jeff Bezos, for example, like the stock price of Amazon just during COVID tripled. So it's like there are people who are literally profiting off the misery of other people. And like people that have enough money to solve these problems just single-handedly by themselves. And we're not even, and then you find out like people at companies like Amazon and Walmart and these places barely even pay taxes, if they pay taxes at all. So it's like, not only are we allowing them to pay their workers less than it costs to live, which then creates a big burden on the government for social welfare programs, which wouldn't be necessary if these people just paid their employees enough to support themselves.
Right.
So when we start talking about, a $15 minimum wage, I think it's well and good, because, where I'm from in the Midwest, $15 is enough to rent an apartment and sustain yourself. Like, you as an individual can live on $15 an hour. If you're really good with your money, you might even be able to buy like a small starter home if you save up for a couple years on that income. But in most, I don't want to say in most of the country, in the areas where the vast majority of the US population lives, which is in bigger urban areas, $15 an hour ain't shit. Like, it's a poverty wage where I live. It's a poverty wage in LA. It's a poverty wage in Boston. It's a
It's a
poverty wage in
poverty
New
wage
York.
in most places. You're 100% right.
And the minimum wage, an argument that a lot of Republicans like to use is the minimum wage is not supposed to, be enough to support yourself and all that crap. But that's a flat out lie, because if you go back and listen to FDR's, like when he rolled out the minimum wage, he flat out said a minimum wage should be enough for an individual to support themselves. And that's just the way it is in
And that
most
makes
Western democracies.
sense.
Yeah, like Australia, most of Europe, like France, Germany, like you don't have this situation where working class people can't even afford housing. Like, you have to work three jobs just to have a one-bedroom apartment.
Right.
Like, that is crazy.
Right.
And recently, because it's a big issue in Denver, because Denver's there was an article that came out a couple months ago that said, Denver's housing market has been increasing the way it has, and we're on pace to surpass, either Los Angeles or New York. I'm not sure which, but we're on pace to surpass one of them as more expensive to live in than one of those cities in the next by 2030, because our housing costs just keep going up and up and up. But it's like, if housing costs keep going up and wages aren't going up, then what that means is most people are falling further and further behind every year. It's like, you know, even if if you're a person who just hates poor people, like you should not want that to happen, because eventually if people keep falling further and further behind, there's going to start being more and more social unrest. And it's
And
like,
not, yeah, and not just that. I mean, we're not really touching even upon the psychological effects of this.
yeah,
I mean, as an example, your friend has been struggling with depression. I mean, for a lot of people, depression is, something that's hereditary, but for a lot of people, depression is part of daily life. It's like, you know, it's external things affecting them.
yeah,
And I can't get over, like every time I'm back home and I watch television, I can't get over the ads for anxiety and depression and focusing, so that you can work more effectively and and be more productive. And there's just no, first of all, there's no time for rest. That's
No.
one. And number two, everybody's on drugs or
Yeah.
getting therapy. And it's like, if all of the country, majority of people are either on drugs for psychological reasons having to do with external factors, namely just trying to survive, which for most people, that's why they get on drugs, is that they just want to survive.
Yeah. They're trying to cope with life.
Correct.
Yeah.
And simple things like proper housing, adequate food, and rest, those things are not being regularly fulfilled in American society. It's like, what do you think the country is going to be like? And yet we still have this almost super ridiculous idea of the American dream, of the bootstraps, of the, white picket fence, of the the dog and the, 2.5 kids and the picket fence. And,
Yeah.
we can get there if we try. We still believe in that. And I think it has something to do with all the fucking drugs we're taking to keep us up and to keep us to have the government continuously and the government continuously dangles this carrot in front of us as if to say, yes, continue so that you can get there. And I can't believe that after all these years, we actually still, after all this time, we still have that culture. It's so deeply ingrained in us.
Mm-hmm.
And it also doesn't help with the general attitude of Americans, which is positive. It's like, generally speaking, I mean, it's the reason why I don't claim Australia as my home, is because I do think that, for me anyway, an environment is about the people. It's obviously about, a lot of things, but for me, people make a place.
Yeah.
And the culture is very important to me, and I enjoy the spirit of America because it's home. It's something of which I've identified with. It's something of which I understand. But culturally, I realize there's a huge difference between people, for example, from Australia and people from America. And Australians kind of look at Americans in a very naive type of way, as if they're like blinded because we're so hopeful. Even if there isn't hope in front of us, we still think that, things will be okay. And it's a great skill to have. But I also think there's something unrealistic about continuing to be positive in the face of danger. Not even like, oh, that's bad, just danger. And Australians are on the far like opposite of that, which is like, they're kind of like doom and gloom ish, even when things shouldn't be doom and gloom, which is why like it's hard. It can be really challenging for me to sometimes be there. But I do think that, I mean, it's like, I don't understand how we're not, the government isn't looking at the health of its people, like their overall health. Like, okay, the average person lives until this long. The average person makes about this much money. The average you know what I'm saying? Like, why aren't they looking into these statistics? Like, is the average person on depression pills? Is the average? Because I think we'll be able to find that there's a direct correlation between the Americans who are on drugs or go to therapy for a variety of different reasons, and it having to do indirectly or directly with their standard of living being negatively impacted.
Yeah. Something you said a minute ago about like just kind of like the American obsession with positivity.
Oh, yes.
It reminds me of somebody messaged me yesterday, or it was yesterday or the day before, was just kind of sent me a Facebook message and was just like, hey, I know your heart, I really do feel like your heart's in the right place and you mean well, but your posts are really negative, and I think you should like try to be more positive. And my response to this person was, well, if you know a positive way to kind of talk about the exploitation and just kind of destruction of the spirit and soul of working people in this country, feel free to let me know how to talk about that in a positive way that doesn't hurt your feelings. But I'm going to talk about it the way I see it. And what I see happening is not positive things unless you're in the upper like 10, 15% of this country, because, statistics have proven for the past 30, 40, 50 years, whatever it is, that, our economy has only benefited the top 10%. If you're in the bottom like 90 to 80% of the country, you're falling further behind every single year. Like you're doing worse than your parents were doing. And we're the first generation that has encountered this, where we are doing worse than the generation before us. And, you know, I noticed in America, like, especially recently, like I've been noticing this obsession with like people in our age that are kind of running into this, but they don't want to be negative like me and complain about things, because if you talk negatively about things going on in America, you're often portrayed as being like anti-American, or you just don't, you're negative, you're a whiner, you're a complainer, just go out there and fix things. But what I notice people doing now is turning to these crazy things like OnlyFans, where you have like young women that are having to sell their asses in thongs and do sexual masturbation.
Yeah, but not just that. Also, be a nurse. You know
Oh,
what I'm saying? Have you seen these OnlyFans? I mean, I have never actually ever bought into, you know what I mean? I've never bought, a subscription to OnlyFans, but I do know of a number of people who have had to turn to OnlyFans, who have had respectable, quote unquote, respectable jobs. Like, for example, this nurse that I know who's like, Kai, like, as much as I don't want to do it, it's a lot of easy money for me that I need. I'm like, you're a nurse. You're not getting paid enough. And she's like, if I was, I wouldn't be doing this.
yeah.
And I asked her, I'm just like, you've been doing it for a while. How do you feel? And she was like, honestly, I don't like talking about it because it's soul sucking.
Oh yeah, I can
I have to
imagine.
stop talking about it.
Because somebody I know who does webcam sex work type stuff, I had a very lengthy, Q&A session with them the other day, like maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 days ago, because I was just very fascinated by what this does to you psychologically, emotionally, like doing this for years, because she's been doing it for 10 years now. She started when she was 18. She said she wants to stop at 30, but then she also told me she made $300,000 in 2 years. So I'm like, I mean, I can understand why people do it, because the money is crazy good, or can be, I guess. But the thing here in America, I don't know if you've heard a lot of this, but the thing we keep telling everybody now is go into coding, go into coding, go into coding. But it's like, so everybody's just going to be a coder now? Like
Oh, yes.
how does that
Yes.
have like a well-rounded functioning economy if we're just trying to, shift everybody into coding?
Right.
Or this other thing I see people doing is I believe it's some kind of currency trading, where you kind of trade like how international currencies change valuations, so you're
Yeah.
trying to trade on that like the stock market.
Are you talking about Bitcoin?
It's forex is what it's called.
Oh,
It's the
okay.
one I know a lot of people are doing. But it's like we're trying to, instead of Americans understanding, like, because most people in America understand like, hey, something's not right here, like things are getting worse. But instead of like trying to force our government to change things, we're so conditioned that the problem is us. The problem is never the system. The problem is you as an individual. It's not that the thing has been rigged against you and the laws and the judges have cooked all this stuff for decades. We teach people that the problem is you. If you're not succeeding, the problem is you. So what we're now getting people to do is basically start gambling the little bit of income they have on things like currency trading, or these new apps for stock trading, where you don't even buy a full piece of stock, you're buying portions of stock. That's how bad our economy is now. That in order for them to keep, because I don't know if you agree with this, but I feel our entire economy, at least in America, is set up to basically just extract wealth from the majority of the population.
100%.
So once people know, and we saw this with the Great Depression too, because I'm not sure how familiar you are with that, but
Of
right
course,
right
of
before the
course.
Great Depression happened, what they did was because people were just spending all their income buying up stocks because stocks was just going up, up and up and up. So they were like, it's can't lose things. So they're just spending all their money on stock, their life savings, their investments. And what happened was people didn't have money anymore because things were kind of about the Great Depression was about to happen. So what banks started doing was lending people money to buy more stock because the banks were like, well, the stock's just going to keep going up. It's a can't lose situation for us, you know. And now I think it's illegal for banks to lend you money to do that. But what they've started doing now is they're kind of encouraging poor people to buy, like, instead of buying one piece of Amazon stock, you buy 1/5 of a piece of Amazon stock at a time, just so they can extract that last little bit of wealth out of poor people and out of like working class people, just so desperate for a change to get out of whatever situation they're in. And it's like, I feel it myself all the time. Like, there's so many times, like, you just kind of, you feel like, I don't know how to explain it, but as an adult, especially I guess as a man too, because men are kind of taught like you're supposed to be the head of the household and you're supposed to be able to provide and all that. When you're like a middle-aged man and you work full time and you can't even afford to take care of yourself, it's really hard to have like this sense of like dignity and pride about yourself. And it's something, Martin Luther King was really, really big on talking about, like, dignity and like how important that is. And that's why he fought so hard for raising the minimum wage to a living wage. And it's why, um, it's why people throughout, kind of like the last century across Europe and other places have really argued for paying people a living wage, not only just because it reduces the burden that, people are putting on the U.S. or not the U.S. government, but your government for social welfare programs, but also it gives you a sense of dignity and pride. Because if I can't even pay my bills with my job, why do I care about that job? How am I supposed to be invested in that? How am I supposed to come home and like carry myself with pride and dignity if I can't even afford to support myself? And that's what so many people in this country are going through, and it's only getting worse. And I'm terrified where that's going to lead because as you know, I'm a big fan of history, but when you look at historically, whenever situations kind of get like that, where the power dynamic gets so shifted and like people are struggling so much, usually that's when things like revolutions happen, or, you know, uh, French Revolution comes to mind. American Revolution wasn't about that so much, but I mean, the French Revolution, they were taking people out and just chopping off heads. Like, as much as I am upset with rich people, I don't want to see it come to the point in America where we're taking people out in the street and just chopping off people's heads. Because obviously, with the French Revolution and other revolutions that have kind of been similar to that, you see how it can go sideways real quick. And then it kind of turns on the people itself. And then you get dictators in charge, or, and then they just start killing off anybody that disagrees with them. So it's like, we really need to get our ish together on this. And a $15 minimum wage is one component of that, but we really got to look at housing, like changing the way we view housing, because we view housing basically as an investment opportunity or your retirement strategy, when housing is a human right.
Right.
Like, you
100%. And that is the conversation.
Yeah.
That's the conversation.
Yeah.
Housing is a human right. That's exactly the conversation.
Yeah. We have to get, and I don't know if you've heard of any groups talking about this, but no leftist groups I know or progressive groups are saying that and demanding that be the position people take to get their endorsement.
You're 100% right.
And that's the change I want to see in the next 5 to 10 years in this country. Is if we're gonna right this ship, I definitely feel like we have to get people like AOC, and I hate to always put things on her because she's, it seems like she's always expected to lead every single fight, but I don't mean necessarily her, but politicians that see the world like her, as they're growing in number in Congress and the state houses and city councils. We have to get them to start demanding housing is a human right. And that needs to be the next fight.
Amen. Or it needs to be you.
Yeah. Maybe.
Maybe. And on that note, please sign us off.
Yes. All right, everybody. It's another great episode. I hope you enjoyed that. It was a fun one. It's a very passionate topic for me. I hope maybe you understand, maybe that came across. But um, as normal, like, share, subscribe, and do us a big favor. We are trying to grow our presence on social media. We've done a great job on Instagram, but we need you to start following and liking us on Twitter and Facebook as well,
Yes,
because
please.
especially Twitter, because that's what the people
The
that
young
have
people.
people that matter tend to pay attention to. I feel like Facebook's kind of more for like the common people, and then like Twitter is for more the professional class in the media. So, but till next time, have a good one.
Bye.
Oh my god. Orange is not my new black.